So this video is going to be about the collapse of the lesbian community that's happened in the last 10 years or so. There are communities of lesbians hanging out together. That's definitely still true. But the whole concept of a cohesive lesbian community with a shared sense of pride and political and social goals with women's bookstores and lesbian bars and pink ghettos and women's festivals has pretty much completely imploded for the younger generation. And I just wanted to talk about this not as a person that wants to be patronizing or impart any wisdom. I just thought I'd give my perspective on somebody who's lived between the lesbian feminist generation and the generation that exists now. This isn't just my opinion. This is what I hear other younger lesbians saying. And I've reached out to some of them online and had conversations with them, and a lot of them agree. There's not really much of a supportive lesbian community out there for that. Mostly what I want to talk about is the influence of queer culture on the lesbian community, trans politics, and far-left social justice politics. And first, just about myself, I actually don't identify as a lesbian. I would say I'm more of a homoflexible type, just in theory, not in practice. I've been very happily married to the same person who I've been with for almost 2 decades. And I love that. And women are really my priority and my main thing. So I mostly look at things from that perspective. There's no Prince Charmings in my future. And I'm very proud of my relationship and just the fact that we've been able to be out and change minds. And I'm very happy with my life and my woman-centered life. But you don't have to be a gold star lesbian to see what's happened and to comment on this. Some of the best commentary I've seen on this really has come from heterosexual feminists who in some ways show more concern about the lesbian community that the younger women are coming up in than a lot of lesbians, to be completely honest. So, first of all, I think I'd like to talk about something that Dan Savage said when he was talking about bisexuals. And he said that bisexuals are treated very badly by gay men and lesbians, and a lot of that is because they're in the closet, and they should really all just come out and then kick us out of the movement, meaning him as a gay man and lesbians as well. Well, that's kind of essentially happened to lesbians. Not so much gay men, because there are more gay men than lesbians. There's about 1/3 more in most studies. So they still sort of have their nightlife culture and their gay male spaces, but that isn't the case for lesbians. Pretty much every heteroflexible woman are on women's message boards and websites talking about their lives too. And this has created some conflicts. And to be honest, I've actually read more about cock on women's websites than probably on websites that are geared towards heterosexual women like XOJane and other ones like that. And these mixed spaces wouldn't be a problem if lesbians had alternatives to go to, but they don't. So therefore, it's a lot more of an issue. And the worst part of it is if lesbians do want to create their own space, then bisexuals and transgendered people will scream bigot at them. And this is sort of a no-win situation for lesbians. I don't think bisexual women really understand the need to sort of take a break from talk about heterosexuality and just kind of have a break from it. So it's kind of unfortunate, these dynamics, but it's just kind of an unfortunate side effect of bisexual women and lesbian women being in different situations and having different life experiences. And I don't know how to solve the problem of all the lesbian bi drama, but I can say the way not to solve it is to have, say, a really positive movie review about a lesbian that dumps her lesbian life to be with a man that every other website says was a shitty movie on your woman's website. Because I don't think that women's websites are really the place to remind lesbians that the world revolves around heterosexual men and their dicks. And it's not really conducive to creating, good relationships between bisexual and lesbian women. It doesn't really support lesbian identity. Another kind of example, that's what After Ellen would do. They have a lot of articles like that they promote. Another example of this is Autostraddle printed an article about bisexual women who are with men. And it got tons of comments, which really just shows you how many bisexual women there are than lesbian women, and how many more of them are in relationships with men rather than women. And some of the women in the comments had been lesbians and now they're with men. One of them was leaving her lesbian girlfriend for a guy. But the best one was a man finger wagging at lesbians about how badly they treat bisexuals. So if you read about lesbian feminism in the 70s and 80s and even how things were in the 90s, would lesbians have ever let a man in any of their spaces to dictate to them about how they should feel about the whole complexity of the lesbian bisexual situation? Fuck no. So that's one thing that's really changed. And I just think it's interesting because that's not something that ever really would have happened 30 years ago. Hell no. So these sort of mixed sites would not be a problem, again, if there were more alternatives. And bisexual women need better alternatives too. They should have websites where they can be completely comfortable talking about their issues. Everything I say really applies to everybody in the queer community. And, I think that for these websites, a third of my friends who are in long-term same-sex relationships are bisexual. A lot of them have really interesting stories. And I think a better way to support better relations would really be to focus on that on women's websites. But that's not really the case. And sometimes these websites actually promote these sort of articles about lesbians running to dick and stuff like that to intentionally troll their lesbian audiences, to create drama, to create comments. And so lesbians wind up feeling shittier when they left there than when they arrived. And bisexual women probably do too, because then it just foments these arguments. And I don't want to totally diss these editors of these magazines, because it's a thankless job trying to keep queers happy. It's pretty much freaking impossible because there's so little good minority representation for all minorities, and Black people feel this way, Asian people feel this way. So if you don't get it just right, everybody gets really mad at you. And I'm sympathetic to that, but and there's no money in this. In fact, After Ellen just went under, which isn't any kind of surprise to me. So it is a thankless job running these sites, but I don't think things are set up necessarily with always the best intentions to really actually make things better. Another example of the suckness, I think, of women's websites happened when Autostraddle did a review for Sausage Party. And let me just read you some of the quotes. This is an animated movie, and pretty funny, actually. And they got into all this trouble because there's all kinds of politically incorrect humor in the movie. And so I'm going to read you these quotes from the editors who had to apologize after printing a very supposedly politically incorrect movie review. I want to personally apologize to every reader who was hurt by the Sausage Party review. I failed you as a senior editor of this website, and I failed you as an ally. After we published the review, we heard from Latinx readers who believed the portrayal of Selma Hayek's taco was racist and that it reinforced harmful stereotypes. We heard from readers who were upset that we labeled a taco a lesbian when it seems more likely that she was bisexual. We heard from readers who questioned the consent of the sexual encounter between the taco and the hot dog bun. We heard from readers who found the taco to be a damaging portrayal of a predatory queer woman. I know the taco was a racist caricature, but attributed it to the systematic problem of the media that wasn't necessarily our problem, but it became our problem when we used our voice as a queer publication to write a positive review of that racist caricature and perpetrated a racist narrative for the sake of queer representation in the film. I was deeply wrong for not stopping this immediately. That's all I have to say to that. You know, if I called up my wife, who's of Eastern European descent, and said, I'm going to hit that Polak Piorgi when you get home, she'd laugh her ass off. And thank God for that. That's why I married her. So, anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that. Don't think the women's websites are necessarily really of very high quality for the most part. So now I want to talk about the effects of trans activism on the lesbian community. And I'm going to say some critical things about some aspects of trans activism. I support everybody's right to be who they are, and I support everybody's rights to live in the way that makes them happy, as long as they're not infringing on the rights of everybody else. I also believe it's really good to accept people who are different, and because it mentally damages people to be excluded and not treated well and not accepted, so I support all of that. And I don't think the trans community is any kind of monolithic community. So I just want to deflect some bullshit accusations of transphobia right off the bat. And I'm saying these things because they're necessary, not because I just enjoy dissing people. And I probably used to be one of the most hardcore trans supporters out there that you could find. But there's just some conflicts there, and there's some conflicts that some other women smarter than I am foresaw a long time ago, and I have to give them credit for that. And I really didn't, but am now, and am commenting on it now. I stopped giving money to AIDS organizations in the 90s because gay men would not stop screwing each other in the ass without condoms. And that doesn't mean that I hate gay men. They were 15 years into an epidemic, and I wasn't going to throw money at that anymore when there were condoms on the corner of every intersection in America, and I couldn't take it, and I couldn't take the tears anymore. So just because I criticize something somebody does in the queer community doesn't mean that I hate them, because I don't hate gay men. I love a lot of things about gay men. So I'd also criticize myself or lesbians or bisexuals or anyone else. So one of the first trans critical things that I wrote about on my blog was queer culture is normalizing shaming people for their sexuality on the cotton ceiling issue. The cotton ceiling was an event planned at Planned Parenthood. At all places, it was a workshop where trans women got together to discuss lesbians' general lack of interest in them and how to overcome it. And a lot of people try to minimize this event, and I would be happy to go along with the fact that this was just kind of a one-time thing and wasn't really named well and not make a big deal about it, but unfortunately that event was really mild compared to the blatant, ongoing harassment of mostly lesbian youth who are called vagina fetishists, bigots, superficial, akin to racist, dysfunctional, or transmisogynists for not being interested in dating trans women, or even not just spending all of their energy constantly validating trans women's feelings in queer spaces and validating their penises as female and all of this other stuff. And again, I'm not accusing the whole trans community of being this way. And I think pansexuality is a great identity. There's nothing wrong with that. And this is a bigger issue than just internet trolls. This guilting has been done by Julia Serrano, who is one of the main M2F trans activists, Joss Truitt, who writes for Feministing, and also Molly Parker. They've all written these sort of lesbian guilting articles, and they've been printed on Slate and BuzzFeed and the Daily Beast. So if you have a problem with me calling this out and want to accuse me of like painting people as predatory or something, don't complain to me. Complain to Julia Serrano and, Slate Magazine. And because when this stops, I will shut up, because it's still not going away. I keep expecting it to, and then it crops up again. So here's my favorite quote on this from Raquel Will. And let's see. So this is on BuzzFeed. When I hear that someone doesn't want to have sex with a trans woman because of her penis, say a lesbian who wants to maintain her gold star status, or straight man who insists he isn't gay, I hear assumptions about how the sex would play out. When it comes to queer women's culture in particular, many lesbians misguidedly deal with trauma from the patriarchy by attacking essentialist notions of manhood. But the penis is not an essential element of manhood. It can beautifully and comfortably coexist with womanhood in one body. Okay, first of all, that's patronizing as fuck. Second of all, what is it with trans women's and bisexual women's obsession with lesbians and the term gold star? I mean, really, mostly it's just kind of a jokey term. There might be some lesbians that are jerks about it. I'm sure that exists, but I've never seen this apparently horrible problem of the oppressive gold star lesbian lording their power over other queers in the community. What is up with this? So there's that. And, some trans people and also allies, and you know what? The allies are often the worst. Usually pansexual allies are the worst perpetrators of this, trying to conflate lesbians' lack of interest in trans women with bigotry or racism. And believing that you're racially superior to somebody has nothing to do with, liking pussy the way that God created it. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. But it's precisely the kind of emotionally manipulative argument that's used on lesbians. And these people really aren't much different from Jimmy Swaggart or Pat Robertson, who idealize man and woman under God, but they sort of, bow at queer theory and expect you to too. And bisexuals get a ton of this pressure too, as if they don't have the right to maybe just not be into somebody with gender dysphoria. So it's not really particularly healthy for them as well. And I'll give you a real-world example of this causing actual real-world problems. There's a lesbian porn star named Lily Cade. I think that's how her name is pronounced. And she was minding her own business, doing her little thing on Twitter, and was harassed by trans women for not wanting to have sex with trans women in her porn and not wanting to use trans women in her porn. And, of course, they back off of that. This is usually how it goes down. Trans women realize it's just too rapey to insist somebody have sex with them. So then they say, well, then you just need to validate us as female and include us in your business or include us in your spaces all the time or constantly affirm our womanhood and our penis as female. And, they clutch their pearls and then go down that route. That route. And it's all bullshit and it's all harassment. So what happened to her after this sort of exchange? They put her on Blockbot, which is something that is supposed to be for fascist Twitter trolls. And that's how she was treated. So this is how you can expect bisexual and heterosexual feminists to treat the lesbian community over this. Rather than affirm a woman's right to run her business how she wants, label herself how she wants, use the term gold star if she wants. No, they're not going to affirm that. They're going to put you on a block list. So yeah, just don't tell me that this isn't a big deal, because it is. And pisses me off, too. So am I being a jerk to trans people who face a lot of rejection and hurt feelings and depression and anxiety? Well, my first experiences when I came out were pretty freaking awful. And trans women are not the only queer people that experience rejection and loneliness. And, the first woman I was with was a fake lesbian that really just wanted somebody to do PDA on for attention back when being a lesbian was actually edgy in the 90s. So I got chased, I guess. I spent years, long periods of being extremely sexually and emotionally frustrated. Nobody I fell in love with loved me back. I couldn't get laid for the life of me. And that was hard for a sex-obsessed person like myself. And I never felt emotionally or sexually entitled to anybody. So if you think some dyke living in Nebraska, because she's stuck there having to take care of her mom, and that's what they call you in Nebraska, a dyke. If you think she's getting all this hot girl-on-girl action, yeah, you're probably wrong. And not every lesbian is like running around P-Town and making it to Dinah Shore, all the time. It can be a pretty lonely existence too, but they don't tend to take this kind of attitude with people. It's usually M to Fs, trans women, and it's usually directed at lesbians. That's how it goes down. And that's the truth. I'm sorry, but, bisexuals will kind of guilt trip lesbians about not being interested in them. That's a completely different issue. And that's a whole video in of itself. And there are bigoted reasons lesbians don't date bisexuals. Some lesbians hate bisexual women's guts, and that's bigoted. There are other reasons. They might just not be comfortable with it. Maybe the idea of getting left for a man is just worse than getting left for a woman. It's out of their comfort zone. It's a sexual turnoff to them. I don't see a problem with that. So I'm pretty down on this idea of lesbian pussies as an affirmative action program for the LGBT community. So the other thing with trans politics I want to talk about is the increased amounts of F to Ms and transitioning youth. And there's a lot more F to Ms than there were 25 years ago, even though these procedures were available to them. And I know a lot of butches and lesbian feminists have been really concerned about this issue for a long time, and it really wasn't on my radar. Everybody I hung out with was all about butch pride and lesbian pride, and I hung out with some of the most masculine women, really, and I never saw people suffering from this horrible, crippling gender dysphoria. It just wasn't around me. And I don't think anybody should go under the knife for any reason. I don't think that that's a positive outcome, to have to be on medication and go in for surgeries. But a lot of trans people insist that that's what makes them happy, and I'm not going to patronize those people and say I know what's best for them, or deny that many of them say is exactly the right thing for them to do. But I do have to say that I think lesbians and me, who's mostly gay, have a right to our experiences and our reactions. And I have to say that it really kind of, as an older person seeing this, it really kind of fucks with your head to look around and, you think that you're in this community that was really, feminist and woman-centered and all of this, and to all of a sudden look around and see that a third of your community really wanted mastectomies and testosterone injections. It's, it fucks with your head. It really does. I mean, it doesn't bother some people. Other ones are bothered by it. It just kind of depends on the person and sort of how tribal they are and how much they want that supportive community there for them. And it's not really okay to express that. I mean, where does a butch lesbian really go to express their pain about watching a bunch of their friends transition and feeling lonely and maybe feeling isolated? Because it's not really politically correct to do that. You constantly have to validate everybody else's identity, especially if you're a lesbian. And I feel sorry, especially for, women in that situation who are younger and they're seeing this around them and they are being emotionally affected by that. And there's not really a lot of places to sort of go to even talk about that. And the other thing that I want to talk to in relation to that is the increasing amounts of youth who are being transitioned. They are socially transitioning children as young as 5 years old now. They're giving them hormone blockers as young as age 11, even cross-sex hormones now at age 12. And there's been a very rapid increase in female teenagers wanting sex reassignment surgery. And I got a little chart here I'm going to show you. And this has all happened in the last 4 or 5 years. And so this is a percentage ratio of males to females. And as you can see, even just 10 years ago, there was twice as many males generally as females in these gender clinics. The older late onset type tends to come out later. So if you look at trans stats, it's kind of evened out to an equal amount of M to Fs and F to Ms recently, but the children were usually more male, like the younger ones. And that has dramatically changed really quickly, where there's 2 or 3 times as many females as males in some of these clinics. And normally the change in any kind of situation like that would cause people to really take notice and be really concerned about it. All of this is being lauded as wonderful social progress. And except by a very few people that are actually really concerned about this, like me. And there are a lot of older women in the community, and gay men have been talking about this as well, older gay men, that feel like they would have been put at risk of being put on hormone blockers and being transitioned because they had serious gender dysphoria when they were teenagers. And they eventually came to accept themselves. And now that whole entire experience, they look at it and they see it being eradicated, and they're upset about it. And I think that's justified. It's a whole experience that's potentially going to be erased in the future. And nothing exemplifies the reason why I care about this more than watching and reading about the detransitioners that have been coming forward. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not a crier, but I'm not going to lie. Some of these stories make me bawl. And it's because they talk about having transitioned for some fucked up reasons, not necessarily healthy ones. And the fact that now they're damaged by this is really, really quite, amazing. And, I don't want to say sad, but it's definitely something we want to avoid, having this happen to people. And it's the exact opposite of everything that I saw lesbians work for. Lesbians who I was surrounded by, the lesbians that were my mentors, were working for women's rights. They were all about lesbian pride. They were all about body acceptance. They were all about sex positivity. They worked in anti-violence projects where they really taught girls and women to have self-esteem. And seeing all of that idealism just like crash and burn into, ashes in the cases of these detransitioners, like I could barely take it. I can't take it. Reading about that, it's hard. And what some of these detransitioners have said, a couple of them that I've heard who were pediatric transitioners, and then also some of the older ones, is that that contradicted something that I wanted to believe, and that was that F to M's are really just hardwired as male, and they really just want to do this for the right reasons, and people aren't being affected by homophobia or things like that. And I think that was really naive on my part, and I just it made me reflect on actually some really screwed up things I did around my sexual orientation. And after I came out, I knew there wasn't a snowball's chance in hell I'd ever wind up with a guy. But I probably hooked up with more guys after I realized I like women than before, and I hated every minute of it. And I knew it wasn't right for me. It was unethical because they were all really nice guys that just wanted nice relationships, who treated women well. And I did that because of internalized homophobia. I wanted to feel like I had a choice about what was happening to me. I wanted societal validation. I didn't want to feel like I'm just some, dyke that nobody would want, that's not desirable to men. And it was really screwed up. So, the other thing around that, just thinking about internalized homophobia and what it means to be a woman, is thinking about when I was younger. I desperately wanted to be a boy when I was a kid. And just as I started growing out of that tomboyishness and hit puberty, I became really fascinated with sex. And I'd read my parents' psych journals. And even back then in the 70s, these journals would reference the Freudian theory of penis envy. And I remember reading this and being really damaged by it. It's the idea that all women really want to have penises. And I'm like, if women want that, that must mean that penises are better because being a man's better and having a dick is better. And it really affected me pretty profoundly to the point where I was really, really depressed about being a girl. And I didn't have dysphoria, but I really experienced a lot of depression over being female around that, and that was the kind of messages that I was I was getting, and I didn't know at the time that I was going to have this incredible female-centered sex life with a partner that can get off multiple times and be loving life, but I didn't know that when I was 13 years old. So I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, but I'm just making the point. I think it was very naive of me to believe that some women don't transition for some messed up reasons that are related to body hatred and internalized homophobia and male supremacy and all of these things. And so I also want to talk about kind of so I'm really screwed through my notes. Another aspect of the trans movement, and that's the whole genderqueer non-binary movement. And I totally support trans rights and visibility and people getting the best healthcare and support and all of that for people that really do have gender dysphoria. But unfortunately, the movement has gotten to the point where it's rife with Rachel Dolezals and fetishists and special snowflakes and people desperate for attention. And that's just kind of the truth. And this isn't good for the legitimate trans movement. And a lot of trans people say this, and they often get attacked as well. A lot of my opinions about this actually come from trans people, not just my own opinions and observations. And, it's gotten to the point where if you're not 100% supportive of this lesbian, and this person identifies as a lesbian, if you're not 100% supportive of this lesbian heading up your lesbian support group, you're a transphobic Nazi. And that's the reality of where the trans movement is. And I think it calls into question that, some people maybe should have the right to take a critical look at some of this, of what's going on. I think that a lot of the trans propaganda is really seriously reinforcing gender stereotypes. And the worst of it is, I think it's really having a negative impact on teenage girls. I think it's really exacerbating neurosis. It's exacerbating gender dysphoria. It's almost encouraging them to be unhappy with being female and encouraging them to be unhappy with their bodies. And I just look around at a lot of these YouTube videos, I read these articles, and I don't see a lot of mental health and social progress really happening there. I mean, I just have to call it, how I see it. And I don't see this as really truly liberating people in a meaningful way in most cases. The perfect example I can give you is a person in the comment section of an article on a hip woman's website. And they said they would have just identified as a butch lesbian 20 years ago, but they identify as either non-binary or genderqueer now. And they also stated that every time they use the bathroom, they sit there and have a major internal struggle over which bathroom to use. Now, this isn't a butch lesbian who's afraid to go into the women's restroom because she's going to get harassed or side-eyed. Butch lesbians have been getting side-eyed in women's bathrooms throughout history, and they will continue to do so despite these bathroom bills that are going on. This was somebody having kind of like this terrible internal struggle just over which bathroom to use. And I got to be honest, if you're, I can't go along with this. I can't. I try to be open-minded about this whole genderqueer thing and non-binary thing and just keep an open mind. But you know what? If you're having a major fucking existential crisis every time you're using the bathroom, you just need to, go about your day. Pick a bathroom, go about your day, do your job, walk your overweight dog, get some exercise, donate blood, take up Spanish lessons, wank off, watch The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills with a pint of Haagen-Dazs, because anything is more productive than that. And I just don't think this is the kind of culture that should really be, encouraged. I don't think it's really productive, and I think it's much more progressive just to see the overlaps of men and women, and to see how humanity is unified, and that you can have macho females and you can have femi males, and skip the 50 gender identities on the dating apps. Again, I'm not discounting the real gender dysphoria experience that trans people have. So, but you say there's always been third gender people, there's always been two-spirited people. Well, that was back in traditional societies, and traditional societies were very, very segregated, and they also were rigidly controlled by gender expectations and sexual stereotypes, and women gathered and men hunted, men ran the government, women took care of the house. And you know what? We don't have that anymore. So we don't even need for someone to be two-spirited, because we don't have that gender division really anymore. So it's actually a lot less necessary than it used to be. Anyway, that's my take. And I'm non-binary. I've experienced autoandrophilia, and I like lingerie. My wife is an excellent motorcycle rider. She's been dirt biking since she was 10, back when she really wanted to be a boy. And she likes nail polish too. She's got Pensacola Pearl Red on right now to bring out the Southern Belle in you. So, yeah. Anyway, everybody's non-binary. When you start making other people constantly acknowledge it as an identity and not just an adjective, it starts to become narcissistic and self-absorbed. And if it's encouraging you to obsess and be unhappy and that's definitely not progress. So, let's see. Another example of that, there was a teenage girl who looked just like a teenage girl who went into a boys' bathroom at either middle school or high school and was teased by boys, and all this drama was created by it. There was a news report on it, and the faculty had offered her to use the faculty bathroom, but that wasn't good enough for her. And so it's getting to the point now where schools can't really just educate. So why can't a school system call out this little attention-seeking narcissist in this case? Because they are so terrified a LGBT organization is going to come in and swoop in and scream transphobic bigot at them. So it's really breaking down the ability of school systems to function in these circumstances. And, that's really unfortunate. And a lot of gay men and lesbians and some bisexuals too don't really want to be associated with some of the sort of crazier aspects with what's going on with legitimate trans rights. If you really want to hear the best sort of critique of this stuff, there's a guy named Yorick, Yorick, I think it is, on YouTube, and he's a trans man. I love him. And he talks about how transgenders are really hurting people with legitimate gender dysphoria. And so you should check out his videos. Trigger warning, he's harsh and he swears. So the last thing I want to talk about is far left social justice politics. There's a lot of censorship that's been happening in society in general, and mostly on college campuses. Jermaine Greer, Julia Bindel, Bill Maher, Milo, all these people get no platforms because, they say things people think are rude. And it's really turning college campuses into infantile support groups. And the worst example of queers participating in this, which unfortunately a lot of them do, was the censorship, the attempt at censorship that happened when Miriam Namazi came to a campus in Britain. And she is an atheist who criticizes the misogyny and gay rights abuses in Islam. And so the Islamic Student Union wanted to no platform her. Well, the Feminist Student Union and the LGBT Student Union came out on the side of the Muslim Student Union. And I have to say, if you're a lesbian or a bisexual woman who attacks a feminist thinker who is literally risking getting shot by a jihadi to bring attention to misogyny in cultures like Islam, or gay rights abuses in cultures like Islam, and religious extremism. I'm gonna be blunt here. You are too fucking stupid to have inherited all of the civil rights and sexual freedom that you have, that was given to you by women, and a lot of them were lesbians and bisexual, who put their asses on the line in the suffrage movement, in the women's movement in the 60s, in the lesbian feminist movement. And really, if you think that your rights can't be taken away and you don't need to take them seriously, and you don't think other women, shouldn't be able to advocate for those rights for other women in third world countries, when that's actually their own culture that they're criticizing, you should look at Iran, which is a place that actually got worse for women, and read the Handmaid's Tale, because in that book, that's pretty much how women have lived in a lot of places throughout most of history. So, anyway, don't be stupid and naive. And if there is somebody that comes on your campus that's criticizing you, say if some homophobe came on a campus and they're going to try to say, gay people are terrible parents. Well, you know what? I would invite that, because I read and I could dispute their arguments because I've read years worth of sociological studies that say otherwise. And I would rather openly debate my enemies in public than scream, I'm triggered and I'm microaggressed and hide in a corner. It's really not, it's maladaptive and it's not helpful. And you know what? Maybe sometimes your enemies have some valid criticisms that you need to hear, and you should be open to hearing that. So that's my take on that. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to say that, now there are actually lesbians that are afraid to identify as lesbians. They're pressured to identify as queer because it's more inclusive. And I think that that's a problem. And I just saw this reinforced on some lame-ass queer website about how, is lesbian relevant and isn't it exclusive to identify as one? This anti-lesbian, homophobic bullshit that lesbians are exposed to now is really, not cool. And it doesn't get called out by, any of these women's websites. I don't know how 40-year-old editors of some of these magazines watch 18-year-old baby dykes get called bitches on Tumblr, for some of this stuff, and don't say anything about it. I don't get it. That's not me. But I think when things are that way, I think that you have a problem. I think that when the most socially relevant, intelligently written articles don't stand a snowball's chance in hell of getting published on a queer site because they're written by a detransitioner and we can't talk about that, I don't think that that's a good thing. When, the most important issues of your community are being ignored in favor of talking about the oppressiveness of racist tacos and biphobic tacos that are animated vagina euphemisms, shit has really jumped the rails. And when lesbians are terrified of being, branded as transphobic and biphobic just because they want to have their own little space on a message board, free to, discuss their own issues and not constantly bow to the altar of queer theory and be thought policed by everybody else, that's actually a form of oppression. It's not getting a fire hose turned on you oppression, but it's a type of oppression nonetheless. And, when the scant few websites that you have for women make you feel shittier when you leave there than when you arrived, I don't think that that's a positive cultural development. And you know what? That's not how it used to be. I mean, these spaces and bookstores and magazines, they used to have your back. And they used to really promote lesbian pride. And you felt like they were there to really support you. And you know what? That's gone. It really is. And so what what do we do about all of this? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But if there are any younger lesbians who happen to watch this and, want to hear what I'm saying, I just wanted to tell you that lesbians were once a proud people who gave no fucks. And I think it would be healthy to start bringing some of that back. And it doesn't have to be something that's really hateful and extremist, which it has been in the past sometimes, but just to acknowledge that you deserve to have a time and place to prioritize your own issues and not everyone else's, because, everybody's issues are not always compatible. Lesbians need fertility rights and legal issues around that. Gay men are still dealing with HIV rates happening in their community. Bisexual women are suffering a lot of violence at the hands of men. Trans people have their own issues. All of these issues are not the same, and everybody needs to have their own places where they can address their own issues, and we need to stop pretending that queer is always taking care of everybody, because it's not. And I hope there starts to be some kind of a backlash to this sort of anti-lesbian stuff and pressure to identify as queer and all this other stuff that's been going on. And I would really like to see a movement that's really pro-woman, really pro-lesbian, and pro-everybody doing their thing, and really pro-body acceptance, really pro-gender acceptance. Because I think it's getting to the point where there's actually pressure on women to, transition, and that involves a lot of really intense hormones and surgery. And we don't want that. If there's anybody on the cusp that can be helped by maybe a more positive, culture that supports pride and feminism, I think that would be a positive thing. It's not going to work for everybody, but it might work for some, and because it seems like there's more gender nonconforming women that hate their bodies than ever. And, I don't think that lesbians being afraid to identify as lesbians is a good thing. And I think that, to be honest, your whole entire generation is being completely mind-fucked into believing that you don't have a right to these things. And, I don't think that that's healthy. Maybe it's time for some rich lesbians to start pulling some of their money out of these LGBT orgs that aren't really supporting the lesbian community anymore. And, maybe lesbians need to go back to sort of funding and supporting their own things like they used to have to do in the 70s when they didn't have access to any kind of media or anything else. At least there's the internet, but it would be nice to see some more quality things, like, I don't know, maybe an actual quality website for women that doesn't troll you, that is supportive and actually tries to solve problems. I'm trying to figure out a way to do that. I'm not really rich enough to do it quite yet, but I'm thinking about setting up some kind of nonprofit organization just to kind of do my part. But, bisexuals issues don't really get addressed either, as I said before. LGBT orgs hardly spend any money on their issues, so everything I'm saying really applies to everybody. And I'm not saying there are definitely pockets of lesbians that are doing cool things. I've read some really amazing blog posts by some really amazing young lesbians that could be really great leaders, and I hope that they continue to do that and speak up for their community and their rights. And there is some of that going on. I just wish that I'd like to see, a little bit more community-minded things going on. And despite all the wonderful gay rights gains and lesbian rights gains and same-sex marriage getting passed, you don't want to forget that you're still a vulnerable minority. And there are other issues coming in the future, like designer babies, for one thing, that could possibly erase all queer people. And these are things you need to pay attention to if you want there to be lesbians in the future. And to be honest, the lesbian community is way too diluted by the whole queer thing on one side, and to be honest, way too fucking assimilated with mainstream society on the other. And it's very, very important to maintain community-minded spaces, to maintain politically minded spaces, to really just to make sure that you have your own back and that you're taking care of each other. So I just want to say, don't allow yourself to be brainwashed into believing otherwise. And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. It's kind of a long rant, hopefully not too curmudgeonly. Maybe my next video will be on something happy like G-spot orgasms or something. But that's just my opinion. Thanks for letting me get all that off my chest. And just go be yourself and be proud and be happy. Being different really presents a wonderful opportunity for growth and seeing the world in a special way. And you should make the most of that. Okay. Bye, guys.